Sacred Heart is proud to sponsor Pensacola Histories in recognition of the Daughters of Charity who brought their mission of care to Pensacola over 90 years ago.
Hello and welcome to our continuing story of Pensacola, North America's first place city. In this series of episodes, we've been talking about the area's two prominently historic cemeteries, St. Michael's and St. John's, and what they mean to our community in terms of background and history, and of course as a part of the understanding of how people here have lived over the centuries of Pensacola, beginning of course in 1808 when St. Michael's was created. Now, basically, we've talked a little bit in the past about how St. Michael's itself was laid out, how it came to be when the erosion began to tear apart the original British cemetery, how the Catholic Church and then others were responsible for the cemetery, the kinds of burials that were held there, the kind of funerary art that was put in place, and that basically was our story, noting also that many, not all, but many of the the burials in St. Michael's relate to people who were prominent earlier in the 19th century. Then, of course, we turn to St. John's, which was opened officially in August of 1876 and was put in place by the Masonic Order with assistance from the city of Pensacola, and how that cemetery, with its 28 total acres, has been devoted to all kinds of burials, that there are many different ethnic groups represented in the burials there, and that, of course, there have been many very prominent people in both the 19th and the 20th centuries who are laid to rest in that particular cemetery. We've talked a little bit about, too, of course, about some of the elements that have been in place in both of them. How the St. Michael's, of course, we see a lot of people who died there because of yellow fever, and of course in St. John's we have more of people of social prominence that we recognize from the last 2 centuries. Well, as we look at these two cemeteries, there are an element that as one visits there, it is kind of fun to look at. Now, as you walk through a cemetery and you look at the various gravestones, you'll see, time after time, you'll see what I call funerary art. You'll see the picture of a rose. You'll see some ivy that is twined perhaps along the whole gravestone. You'll see representation of the lily, the willow, the poppy. All of these things, they are forms of flowers. And people say, well, now isn't it nice that people would do that? It makes the gravestone certainly very nice. But basically, what we don't appreciate so much in the 21st century is when all of this was being done, basically all of those little elements had a meaning. Every one of them had a representative idea that we're trying to express here, that was supposed to represent the character or the life of the person buried below the stone. And I'm going to read off several of them for you, because as you go through the cemetery yourself and take a look, you can see, as we did some filming out there on stories of both of these cemeteries sometime before, the art itself is very beautiful. It is very carefully done, because what we don't appreciate in the 21st century is that going back 150 to almost 200 years, there were men and there were companies that were true specialists in preparing such stones. We had only one company up into the 20th century that did such work at all. Most of the work that was done, whether it was an above ground vault or below ground vault, or whether it was an obelisk or whatever it happened to be, the gravestone itself was usually prepared for the family, either in New Orleans, Montgomery, or in a few cases even in New York City, because there were specialists there who did that work. Of course, it was expensive, and so you can get an idea that when you look at a gravestone in any one of these centuries and you see a large one, you recognize that the family either had resources on its own or had many friends who would come together to help and pay for such a thing. Now, let's look at some of these symbols and see what they meant as you are looking at the gravestone. You walk along and you see something, a calla lily that is nicely informed on the stone itself. That usually represented the fact that underneath that stone are two people, a husband and wife, and the calla lily represents the idea that this was an exceptionally happy marriage. That would be number one. Now, Ivy is a symbol that is used a great deal, and often ivy is combined with something else on these gravestones. But ivy generally was meant to show that the individual who was buried there was a very friendly person, and that people had an outreach to them as friends. And the family, making arrangements for the stone, wanted everybody to remember the friendly character and nature of the person who was buried there. Then not the calla lily, but the traditional lily is another one that is used frequently on these stones. It is usually seen for young women who died unmarried, and the lily itself represents purity. And you'll see a lot of those. Sometimes you'll also see the lily in combination with a rose. Now, the rose is used for two different reasons, two different ways. The rose itself represented love. Basically, this is showing that someone was buried there who had a very deep love relationship to the person who was arranging the burial. But then if you saw the rose with the stem broken, this usually represented that the person there was usually a girl, a young lady, and she had died very young, and the broken stem represented the fact that she had died prematurely, before her life could really come into its own. The willow, we always use the term the weeping willow. Well, the willow is displayed on these stones many times, and basically it's intended to convey the message that people left behind are mourning. They show great grief over the passing of the person who is below the stone. Now, often, but in the cemetery, you will find that you'll find a couple of hands that are literally come together like this, and usually, well, almost in every case, there are the cuffs of the man's shirt or coat and the woman's dress are shown, and basically the two hands clasped together show that this is a husband and wife, that this once again has been a very happy marriage. They were a happy couple, and often, not always, but often, some of the critical information, the data for the people, is engraved right on the cuff itself. So it kind of serves a double purpose. Now, as you go through the cemetery, you're going to find 15, 16, 17 more different flowers that are shown either individually or in combinations. And we won't go through them all here, but the idea, as you look at one of these, remember that they were not put in place just on happen chance, but every one of these symbols was indeed symbolic. It had a meaning to the people of the time that we're talking about. Now, if we look through the story of the cemeteries themselves, we have to recognize that, as Mr. Bliss told us in his magazine article of the late 19th century, it is always a problem to maintain a cemetery. And the question always comes down to who owns it. Who holds the responsibility? Where is the money going to come from to do all of the things that need to be done on a regular basis once a burial has been taken place? Now, actually, arranging for a burial is a relatively simple thing. That's a ritual that has been handed down for years, and it's not greatly different today than it was 100 years ago. But the actual maintenance, now that's something else again. And what Charles Bliss discovered in the late 1900s was true. The St. Michael Cemetery, well, in his views, it was a mess. And it took a lot of effort by a lot of people to bring that around. And all of this sort of operates on a sine curve. When there is a problem, the question is, who is going to fix it? Now, in recent times, we want to give credit to a number of people, and we can pass this across the story of both cemeteries. People have come out who have been helpful. As I mentioned earlier, St. John's Cemetery was begun by the Masonic Order in the 1870s. It was turned over to a separate corporation in 1906. The only proviso there was, of course, that the new corporation had to have as its board of directors men who were Masons, and they were and still are responsible for the ownership and operation of that cemetery. St. Michael's Cemetery, on the other hand, has gone back and forth between ownership by the church and by separate foundations, and it kind of has gone back and forth. And of course, it's been very difficult in more modern times to find people willing to accept the responsibility because it takes time and it takes money. And that is where we have come into the era now that I would like to call an era of volunteerism. Because it's not infrequent that you will see stories in the press about how volunteers from the Boy Scouts and from the Navy and the Marines have come forth and helped other volunteers in coming out and holding special days where they would move in there and literally help clean up. And sometimes this is a huge job, and of course it is done exceptionally well by all of these people. I wish I could tell you that there is an assurance that that's going to be done forever. We don't, in the years as we record these stories, we just don't know. Now, returning again to the story of St. John's, currently the Friends of St. John's are working diligently to try and protect not only the view, the look, and the maintenance of the cemetery itself, but also to put in place in using modern technology the story of every piece of data they can collect on who is buried there. And what they have done, of course, is put this all into computer form, and they have represented now on the computer form what they have there, something over 10,000 burials. Now, they know that number is too small. There have probably been many others, and so, because in a few cases, literally there have been burials one on top of the other, and there is no record of how the sequence has gone. But basically, that is being done. The second thing that they are trying to do is to convert the original gatehouse, which had a number of varying forms over time. They're trying to convert that into a place where people can come to do research, and also where they can conduct meetings if they wish, for the family, but during a burial ceremony or for other purposes as well. So that work is going on, and they of course are also trying to add other elements of beauty to the cemetery. Hopefully in the future there will be a new fountain out there. They're looking also at additional fencing around the entire perimeter, and this sort of thing is sort of the dream that people have as the cemetery maintenance goes on. We look at St. Michael's Cemetery, to the wonderful work that has been done there by Dr. Judy Benz, Nancy Fetterman, and other representatives from the University of West Florida who have kind of taken on that kind of work as a project. They are doing wonderful work in identifying, as they have done at St. John's, who the people were, and getting more biographical data on paper here, so that the cemetery, actually both cemeteries, can serve us all as research tools, which is what they basically are, or they can be. Now, in closing this episode, we want to remember a few things out of the past. What is a cemetery? Well, going back to what Socrates and some of the others wanted to call it, they say it's a sleeping place. It's a place where people have been buried. The people who are there, and the cemetery itself deserves a great deal of respect. This is the final resting place of our ancestors, and if they are deserving of all of the care that we can provide. And consequently, this is one of the things that we try to emphasize as the volunteers work there as well. As you pass through St. John's or St. Michael's, as I hope you will do one day, take a look at what is there, who is there, the reverence with which all of this has been put together and cared for, and remember how it relates to things that you do in your daily work. Who were these people? Why should they be remembered? What lessons do we learn from the lives that they have there? And again, if you should happen one day to be doing family history or corporate history, you would find the presence of this data and the story that these cemeteries tell so valuable to you in what you're going to do in the future. All of this, of course, is dependent upon what you and other individuals or classes or students may wish to do. We are very fortunate in having two wonderful historic cemeteries. They list in total about 20,000 names that we can go back to, and each name represents a story. If we go back to 1808 or 1850, we're talking about people who were in the Civil War, who were in the War of 1812, who were in the Spanish-American War. There are a number of burials, of course, from World War I and World War II and subsequent wars. So all of this is part of our story. And if we are going to call ourselves, and rightfully so, North America's first place city, this is part of our documentation. This is our story. Historic cemeteries, we are so fortunate to have them, that they are being well cared for, as well as we possibly can at the moment. And we hope that when people come to visit you, this might be one of the things that you would have on the list of things to do. Take them out, have a good look at one of the cemeteries, or both of them, so they can appreciate what North America's first place city is all about, and how it represents, the cemeteries represent so much for so many who have been here for so long.